Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Today we have Kathy Jordan back. She's one of the dietitians from Big Y World Class Markets, and we're happy to have her back today talking about heart healthy eating. It's Heart Month, and seems like a good time to talk about that. Just a reminder, if we are recording for cable, so if you do not want your image on the screen, you can go ahead and shut your video off. And I'll turn it over to Kathy. Thank you.
Okay. So today I have slides. So I am going to go into share screen. And I think this is right here. And start my slideshow. Okay. So as Debbie said, February is Heart Health Month. So we thought this would be a timely topic. And so today I'm going to be talking about heart healthy eating, meal planning, and shopping. There's a lot of slides. Some of them I'm not going to spend as much time on as others. And then if you have a question, feel free to ask. Just unmute yourself and ask the question. There's not that many of us on here, so we can make this interactive. All right, so just so you know, there are three consulting dietitians for Big Y, and we all do a bunch of free Zoom presentations every month, and those are listed on the Big Y website. And I have a link for that later in the presentation, but if you just go to bigY.com and go under services, you'll see Living Well, Eating Smart, and then there's several different choices where, so if the Get Social tab is where all the programs are listed. And just a general disclaimer, just to let you know, this presentation today is used for educational purposes only and is not meant to replace your healthcare practitioner's advice or any specific dietary requirements you may have. So why would we want to follow a heart healthy diet? Well, guess what? When you follow a heart healthy diet, that would be similar to what you might do for other health conditions as well. So heart healthy eating can help reduce the risk for other types of chronic diseases. So a lot of the information I'm going to share today would help if you were trying to maybe manage your weight, if you had type 2 diabetes, and just maybe trying to reduce your risk for cancers and things like that, and to help reduce overall inflammation in your body, which inflammation damages your cells and leads to all kinds of chronic diseases. So in the US, there's almost 83 million people that have some form of heart disease. So it's a very common. And as we get older, that's a risk factor. So we're going to be talking about risk factors in a minute. Some risk factors are things that we can control, and there's some that we can't control. So we'll talk about that as well. And just keep in mind, as we talk about all this stuff today, and it seems a little overwhelming, what you need to do is just break it down and make small changes over time, as opposed to trying to do everything at once, which can sometimes be so overwhelming you just quit. So small changes are fine. Just, decide on what you can do on a daily basis, a weekly basis, for example, and then move forward with that. All right, so here are some of the risk factors for heart disease: high blood pressure or hypertension. So if you're on medication and you have that controlled, that does lower the risk again. Also, you can manage high blood pressure with dietary changes as well. So some of you may be managing your blood pressure with diet, some may be on medication or a combination thereof. Same thing with high cholesterol. And especially the LDL cholesterol, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and not having enough HDL cholesterol. So those affect your risk for heart disease. Having diabetes, also being overweight or obese, weight gain. If you're already at normal weight and you start gaining weight, especially as you get older, that will increase your risk for heart disease. And then if you're, obese and have been obese, that's a risk for heart disease. Physical inactivity. So there's a really good article in the Weill Cornell Medicine. If you can see me, I got this in the mail today, and it talks about activity and heart disease. So I'll bring that up later. And then if you smoke, quit or reduce that. Talk with your healthcare professional if you need help with that. And also alcohol. So as we get older, we do not metabolize alcohol as easily as we did when we were younger. You know, as you get older, things don't work as well. So if you have too much alcohol, it can raise your triglycerides. That's like blood fat circulating around. Can also increase your blood pressure. You can, and also when you have a lot of alcohol, oftentimes you're not getting the nutrients you need. They're not absorbed as well. Also, drinking alcohol may be taking place of more nutritious things that you could be having. And then a lot of anger, hanging on to a lot of anger, that type A personality, that's another risk factor. And the things that you can't control, of course, are your age, your race, and your hereditary. So if you have a family history of heart disease like I do, so this topic is near and dear to my heart, no pun intended, as both of my parents died from heart disease when they were in their 60s. So if you have that, you have to be cognizant of that and alter your lifestyle and your diet to help prevent heart disease. Because just because a family member has heart disease doesn't mean you have to, okay? It's not automatic, it just puts you at higher risk. So what causes these risk factors in the diet? Okay, so the dietary components that affect your risk for heart disease include having too many calories will increase risk, too much saturated fat and trans fats, too much sodium, and too much added sugar. So we're going to break these down and talk about each one. So if you have a question as we're going along, please ask it. Just remember to unmute first. All right, so sodium, we're going to start with that because high blood pressure was on right up the top for risk for heart disease. So many Americans have high blood pressure, and if you have high blood pressure, you're usually told to keep an eye on your sodium intake. So that's why we're going to start with that one. So the recommended dietary allowance is 2,300 milligrams per day or less. And then if the doctor tells you to go on a low sodium diet, they're usually referring to cutting that back a little bit to about 2,000 milligrams a day. And sometimes the doctor will tell you to cut your sodium down to 1,500. So that one is very restrictive. The average American eats 3,500 milligrams a day. So that's, or more. So that's a lot more than the recommendation. Now keep in mind, when you think of sodium, you think of the salt shaker, but most of the sodium in our diet comes from things like restaurant foods, processed foods, and not from the salt shaker itself. All right, so here's the good news. You can determine the amount of sodium in a product by looking at the food label. And the new food label gives a more realistic serving size than the previous food labels. And for this fictitious product, we're looking at a package that has 8 servings in it, and a serving size is 2/3 of a cup. Now that's really important because all the other numbers on that food label, that nutrition facts panel, correlate with the 2/3 of a cup. So if you want to know how much sodium is in a product, you go down to about halfway down where it says sodium. If you eat more than the 2/3 of a cup, obviously, then you're going to be consuming more sodium. Please note too that the calories are listed in really large, bold writing now. So that helps too. So just keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. When we use this label, we're talking about that 2/3 of a cup. So if a product has 5% of the daily value based on a 2,000 calorie diet or less, that's considered low sodium. So when you go down this column on the right where you see those percentages, for any nutrient, if it says 5% or less, that's considered low. And if you see 20% or more, that's considered high. So in this particular label, you can see that the sodium is under the 20%, so it's not a real high sodium product. But the sugars are at 20%, so that means that's high in added sugars. Okay, so it's added sugars that we're most concerned about. Some other important nutrients for heart health are also listed on the label. Calcium and potassium are two minerals that are protective for heart health. So you can see how much is in those down the bottom of the label. All right, so terminology as it relates to sodium. So if a product says it's sodium free, then it has to have less than 5 milligrams of sodium per serving. So if you see that right on the front of the package, it says sodium free or salt free, just double check the back panel to make sure, okay? Because every once in a while, a food company will make a mistake and it might not get caught instantly. All right, so very low sodium means it has 35 milligrams of sodium or less per serving. And then low sodium is 140 milligrams of sodium. So if you see that on the front of the label, that means that product is supposed to have under 140 milligrams of sodium. And then there's other terminology that is less vague, so it's harder to know what exactly they mean, and that's reduced sodium. So when you see the terms 25%, 33% less sodium than a regular product, you don't know how much that is unless you know what the regular product had in it. So if you see a soup, for example, that's 25% less sodium, if the sodium was 1,200 milligrams to begin with, the product is still sky high in sodium. So just keep that in mind. And then if you see light in sodium or lightly salted, that means it's at least 50% less sodium than the regular product. Once again, if that was a soup with 1,200 milligrams of sodium, it still might have 600, which is going to be sky high and well over that 20%. So just watch that term. Don't get fooled by that terminology. And then if the product says no salt added or unsalted, that just means they didn't add any salt during the processing, but the product itself, whatever the beginning item was, might have contained some amount of salt or sodium. Okay, so I mentioned soups being, and soup, canned soup mixes, pasta and rice dishes, those tend to be high in sodium. A lot of the sauces, dressings, you got to check your labels for those. And then of course, frozen meals, frozen side dishes, deli meats, processed meats. Those are the things that tend to be high in sodium. And looking at this soup, 2/3 of a cup or 1 cup prepared, it says here. So unprepared, it's 26% of your daily value. Prepared, it's 29%. So you're getting close to a third of your daily sodium allotment. So that's why it's so important to check labels. So here's an example, as I was mentioning, some products that have the various sodium claims. The one on the left says 33% less sodium. So what that means is that's 33% less sodium than the regular Swanson chicken broth, okay? Since the regular chicken broth is so high in sodium to begin with, by cutting out 1/3 of it, you're still at 570 milligrams or 25% of the daily value. So that would still be considered a high sodium product, even though the label on the front says 33% less sodium. Does that make sense? No, okay. All right. The product on the right, the unsalted chicken broth, only has 40 milligrams of sodium because there wasn't any additional added. That sodium is just coming from what was in the ingredients in their raw state. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to fat and cholesterol. So the current recommendation for heart healthy eating is to limit your total fat intake to somewhere between 25 and 35% of total calories. Now, just be aware, this is a general recommendation for heart health. It's, if your doctor said to you, it's okay for you to have a little bit more fat, but make sure your fat's monounsaturated. For some people with diabetes, they've been finding a little higher fat percentage might work well if the fats are chosen carefully. So your doctor might tell you otherwise, but as a general recommendation for heart healthy eating, it's 25 to 35% of total calories. So about 1/3 of your calories coming from fats. And a lot of that fat, of course, like the sodium, is within the food. It's not something you're adding necessarily, although it could be. So for a standard, the whole food label is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So that would equal 22 grams a day. And then they want you to keep the saturated, those are the solid fats predominantly. They want you to keep that to less than 7% of total calories per day of the total calories, and then to limit your cholesterol. All right, so saturated fats, I have a nice picture for that, so I'm going to skip to the next slide. The foods that are high in saturated fat tend to be red meats, like this ground beef here at 85% lean. That might sound lean, but I generally recommend you choose one that's at least 90% lean, because there's still quite a bit of fat in the 85 and 80% lean meat products. Butter fat, anything that contains butter fat like cheeses, whole milk, ice cream, those would have high saturated fat contents mostly. And then some of the tropical oils like coconut, palm, and palm kernel oil are in the saturated fat category. And then on the unsaturated fat side, you have a lot of the mono and polyunsaturated fats and the essential fatty acids that are in the fatty fishes like salmon. So avocado, olive oil, nuts and seeds, and those fatty fishes like salmon, mackerel, tuna, those supply heart healthy fats. And those types of fats will help increase your high density lipoprotein. Sometimes I'll refer, because it's easy to remember, to those as the happy form of cholesterol, whereas the other one, the LDL cholesterol, is not heart healthy. That's found in the ones on the right, in the red meats, in the things with a lot of coconut oil and butter and things like that. Okay. So in reading labels for fat, a label will give you the total fat, and then right below it, it tells you how much saturated fat is in the product. So the one on the left here is a reduced fat dressing, and it only has 2 grams of a total fat, which is only 3% of the daily value. So that's not going to contribute a whole lot to your 25 to 35% of total calories. There's no saturated fat in that product, no measurable saturated fat. Let's put it that way, because I see there are egg yolks in it. So there's going to be a teeny bit from there, but it's too little to have to label it. The product on the right has 17 grams of fat for the 2 tablespoons serving, and 2.5 grams are coming from saturated fat. Still not tremendously high, but just making that simple swap is going to save you a lot of fat and total fat and calories. So fat in and of itself is a macronutrient that's very calorically dense. A gram of fat, there are 9 calories in 1 gram of fat, where there's only 4 calories in 1 gram of carbohydrate or protein. So to see how things that are high in fat can be calorically dense. All right. The other thing to watch on food labels is a substance called trans fats. And trans fats are really, for the most part, manufactured fats. So they take a liquid oil and they turn it into a solid fat, which makes it more shelf stable. And so they used it a lot in processed foods over the years, because they could make a product and it could sit on the shelf for 2 years, for example. The problem is trans fats act like saturated fat in your diet and can raise blood cholesterol levels and increase inflammation in your body. There is a loophole, so you have to be a little bit of a sleuth in reading your labels to discover where the trans fat hides. So the loophole is a product can contain just shy of 0.5 gram per serving and still be called trans fat free. So if it says trans fat and there's a big fat 0 next to it, turn the product over and look at the ingredient declaration and look for the words hydrogenated. You see that circled there, HYDROGENATED, and then there's an oil afterwards. Okay. Hydrogenated means they've turned a liquid fat into a trans fat. So most food companies have been taking hydrogenated oils and out of the products But be careful because some of them are putting in palm and palm kernel oil instead, and those are saturated fats. The other thing to be aware of is if you go to the local bakery, chances are there's still hydrogenated fats in some of those products, as they probably haven't been able to remove them all yet. It's really hard to find good substitutes. That's why. And trans fats tend to be inexpensive, very versatile. They add certain properties to foods. So it takes a lot of recipe modification from the manufacturers in order to come up with a product without trans fats. So baked goods in particular can be a source of trans fats. All right, so moving on to sugars. What's really great is the new food label, which went into effect a year ago, now has a line that's, you can see it circled there. So under total carbs, you've got fiber, which is really important for heart health as well, total sugars, and then under that, it'll tell you of the total sugars, how much was added to the product. So for example, if you had applesauce, apples have natural sugar, right? So I think if they added any sugar to sweeten that, it would give you the total amount of sugar in the applesauce, which is, what's in there from the apple itself. Plus underneath, you can see how much they added to add extra sweetness. Okay. So in this particular product that we've been talking about, it has 10 grams of added sugar, which is 20% of the daily value. Okay. So what they're recommending, only 9 teaspoons per day, or 36 grams for men, and only 6 teaspoons of added sugars, or 25 grams for women. So just to put that in perspective, a teaspoon of sugar has 4 grams of sugar. So this product here at 10 grams has 2.5 teaspoons of sugar added to it per 2/3 cup serving. Okay, so that will help you when you're looking at labels to understand what that all means. Why is sugar an issue? Does anybody have any ideas of why you hear the dietitians and healthcare providers telling you to watch your added sugars? Any idea, Larry or Janet, Debbie, anybody else that's on the call here?
I don't have any idea.
No? Okay.
I should, but I don't.
I will, okay. I have lots of ideas, so don't worry about that, Larry. Okay, I'll give you several. Recent research has shown that added sugars, too much added sugar in your diet can increase blood pressure. So it can lead to hypertension. It's also correlated with type 2 diabetes, increase inflammation in the body, increase risk for infections, and increase risk for weight gain and obesity. So several of the things I mentioned are associated with increased risk for heart disease. So if to be healthy overall, you want to keep your sugar within reason. I'm not saying you have to eliminate all of it, but you just want to keep an eye on it and try to choose products that are more nutrient dense. Because when a product is really high in sugar, oftentimes it doesn't have as many nutrients because the sugar's taking up too much room in the product. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So that was sticking. Sorry about that. All right. And then keep in mind, if you're out and about and you're not in the grocery store and you can't turn the package over and look at the label, but perhaps you're in a restaurant, keep in mind certain things that tend to be high in sugar. And some of those things also are high in sodium as well. But things like barbecue sauce. So you really want to check your labels because it's all over the board. We have one on the left here that has a lot of added sugar. So in this barbecue sauce that I have pictured here, the serving size is 2 tablespoons. Okay. In those 2 tablespoons, you're getting the equivalent to 4 teaspoons of sugar. Whereas the other one, which we don't have the front of it to look at, but the other product has no added sugar. All right, so what we're going to do now is sum up what I've talked about so far and talk about some other things that are important for heart health. And then we're going to look at some labels and take a look at what's in your local grocery store. All right, so a heart healthy diet, like most healthy diets, like the Mediterranean diet and things like that, focuses on eating plenty of fruits and vegetables. Current recommendation is 5 to 9 or maybe even 10 servings a day. So most Americans aren't anywhere near that. So remember I said about small changes? One of the things that you can do is, if you're not eating enough fruits and vegetables, is think about, how can I add an additional fruit or vegetable to my daily diet? So from wherever you are, try to add a little bit more. And then choose for your proteins, make sure those are lean. Choose fish and maybe some meatless options more often. Choose foods that have omega-3s. We'll talk about that in some of the upcoming slides. And make sure you have plenty of dietary fiber. And then what you want to eat less of is the fried, fatty, processed foods, things that are high in sodium and things that have a lot of added sugar. So you can see the differences in the pictures. Of the one on the left is showing a plate with some grilled chicken, lots of veggies, some whole grain, that was probably a whole grain rice, even some legumes. And the picture on the right over here is a typical restaurant meal with a burger, fries, ketchup, which is high in salt and sugar. So just switching over to some more fresher, more whole foods will make a difference. So whether you're going to the grocery store or ordering via Instacart or some delivery, just keep in mind what you want to fill your plate with. You want to start with that plenty of produce because in general, fresh fruits and vegetables are very low in sodium and high in potassium. So remember I mentioned earlier that potassium is good for heart health and to help regulate blood pressure. So you want to make sure you have plenty of potassium. And then if the fresh produce isn't in season, or you want to have something that you can keep in your freezer because it lasts longer, go with frozen and try to pick the frozen that doesn't have any additives. So you just have like plain green beans or just plain unsweetened fruit, for example. And if you choose canned, it's always nice to have a few canned goods on hand, especially if the power goes out or whatever, you can't get to the store. Try to choose the ones that say no salt added. And if you don't have those and you just already have some in your cupboard, you can put them in a colander and rinse them with some cool water for about 20 seconds, and that will remove almost half the sodium. All right, so this is a picture of making another nice meal, some fish, some brown rice, and some fruit and veggies. Okay, so that's the kind of eating pattern that is more heart healthy. And don't forget to have a variety of things from the produce department. You want to have some dark green leafies, some of those darkly colored vegetables. You want to have some of the real colorful fruits, like things like berries, which have lots of antioxidants in them, or those really dark colored grapes. And then try to have a variety, like bananas have different nutrients than avocados, and avocados have different nutrients than, say, spinach. So the more variety, the more likely you are to get different nutrients that you need, and perhaps make your meals more interesting with different colors, flavors, and textures. All right. When you do cook vegetables, so it's okay to eat some raw, but you probably want to have some cooked. Try to cook them in a way that you're not adding unhealthy fats and salt and stuff. So you can steam them. You can use fresh herbs or dried herbs and spices for flavor. Keep in mind, onion salt and garlic salt are high in salt. So you could use onion powder or fresh onion instead. Same thing with the garlic. But steaming, microwaving, roasting, or sauteing are good ways to prepare vegetables. And if you're going to roast or saute, you're going to have to use a little bit of oil. Choose something like a vegetable oil, like olive oil. All right, so moving on to meats and other protein sources. So when you eat poultry, same thing, roast it, use it in stir fry, grill. Try not to do the deep fat fried versions, okay? When you have the poultry, remove the skin, okay? If you choose pork, I'll show you a good option for that in a minute. And with the beef, as I mentioned, try to make sure you get 90% lean. And that would be true too if you pick like ground chicken or ground turkey, make sure it's at least 90% lean. You also can get protein from eggs. So the current recommendation is probably about maybe an egg a day is fine. Eggs are a really good source of protein. And then nuts, seeds, and nut butters and peanut butter, other nut butters and seed butters are all good alternatives to meat for protein. Plus with things like walnuts and chia seeds, you get some of those omega-3 fatty acids we talked about. And then don't forget legumes, adding things like dried beans and peas, or having things like for a meal, you could have something like lentil soup, for example. Hopefully it's not real high in sodium. And then if you don't like fresh fish, you can choose like a lower sodium tuna, for example. What you want to have less often are the processed meats like bacon, ham, hot dogs, sausages, pepperoni, that kind of thing. Fried foods. And then watch the plant-based. If you've been buying things like those plant-based burgers, check the sodium level on those. Some of them are pretty high. All right, so this is pork tenderloin, and I'm showing you this because pork tenderloin is a pretty lean red meat. Okay, pork is still considered red meat, even though it's lighter in color. So pork tenderloin, if you get the plain one that's not seasoned or marinated, that's not going to be high in sodium. And it's also almost as low in fat as chicken. It's pretty easy to prepare. You can roast a pork tenderloin in about 35 minutes in the oven. All right. So, and we talked about the plant-based foods. Some of them are great, but a lot of them have extra sodium. So this particular plant-based burger has 350 milligrams of sodium. And I just want to compare that with this ground beef here. So the same size serving for ground beef is only 70 milligrams of sodium. Okay, so that's the drawback. You might get a little less fat in the plant-based one. You're getting, they're usually legume-based, and they might have veggies in them and stuff, so that's great, but you have to balance that out in order to keep your sodium intake low. So when you think about meats in general, you want to think of those more as, some people like to say more as a condiment as opposed to the main dish. So fill your plate with plenty of plant-based foods and then maybe a little bit of animal protein. Or you could maybe do meatless Mondays, where you try to make Mondays a day where you find alternatives to the meat-based foods. And then seafood, the current recommendation is to try to get at least 2 servings of about 4 to 5 ounces of a fatty fish per week, so you can get plenty of omega-3 fatty acids. And I mentioned some of these before, but I'm going to mention them again. So that would be things like salmon, mackerel, tuna. Okay. Those are probably the best ones. Sardines have, yeah, so the fattier fishes. If you do not like fish and you don't even eat canned tuna, then you might want to consider discussing with your healthcare provider other ways of getting omega-3s. You can get some from things like nuts and seeds, but the conversion of that type of omega-3 into the omega-3s that your body really needs is not that great. So it'd be almost impossible to get enough from nuts and seeds. It will contribute to your overall intake, but it's probably as a standalone, maybe not enough. So you want to talk to your dietitian or your doctor about ways to get enough omega-3 fatty acids. All right, if you go to the deli counter, ask for like at Big Y, you can just ask for the World Classics low sodium turkey. And then if you like cheese, just so you know, Swiss cheese tends to be lower in sodium than some of the other cheeses. In the dairy aisle, choose the lower fat versions of milk. So one of the things you could do is choose non-fat or reduced fat milk and yogurts and cheeses. All those come in reduced fat versions. And then if you like butter, just try to really watch your serving size on that. So this is just an example of why it's so important to read labels. I have a picture of cottage cheese here. And this particular cottage cheese, it isn't plain cottage cheese. It has some stuff added to it. So this particular cottage cheese has pears and sugar and honey added to it. And because of that, the sugar contents, there's a little bit of natural sugar in cottage cheese that's coming from the natural sugar that occurs in milk, but there's added sugar in this product as well. Oops. And there's also, you need to watch your sodium intake for that. All right, so we talked about eggs. I'm going to skip over that, except for I just wanted to mention that there are a couple brands that the chickens are fed a certain diet that allows them to provide omega-3s to you when you choose those brands. So it'll say right on the package that it has omega-3 fatty acids. So if you don't like fish, that might be a good alternative. And then snack foods are tricky. So you want to read your label, and if you choose a snack food, try to choose one that has less than 140 milligrams of sodium per serving, and really watch your serving sizes. I recommend that you don't eat directly out of the box or the package, because you know what happens when you're doing that, especially if you're not eating mindfully and you're not paying attention. Janet's shaking her head, so is Larry. You know what I'm talking about. So to say it's low sodium chips, for example, and maybe that's your favorite food and you don't want to totally give it up. So my recommendation is figure out what the serving size is. I think it's somewhere between 10 and 15 chips. Find a little container that they fit in nicely. Designate that container for that snack. And when you're done with that, you're done. So you put the snack in the dish, and then you seal that package up and you stick it in the back of the cupboard, okay? So you're not going back, you're just reaching in and reaching in and reaching in, because you could end up with a ton of fat and salt doing that and extra calories. All right, and yep, there are lower salt potato chips. There are less fat potato chips. So those kettle chips, I think the regular potato chips are about 160 calories per serving. I think the less fat ones are about 140. So that's in the serving size. And I think the serving size is like 15 chips. Let me see if I have a picture here. I think I do. Yep. Yeah, 15 chips. So if you eat the whole package, if you open up a thing of potato chips and maybe you're watching a football game or whatever, football's over for the year, but you know what I mean. And you sit there and you're eating that, you're distracted, you're not paying attention, and next thing you know, the package is gone. You have to multiply everything by 8, because a bag of potato chips has, depending on the size, but for this one, it's 8 servings. And if you're not paying attention, it's not that hard to just keep eating right through that bag. And then your sodium intake would be sky high, as would be your calories, your fat, and you're not really getting any fiber per se. And then just in general, there's some sneaky sources of sodium you might not think about. Some cereals and some bread products and certainly baked goods tend to be really high in sodium. You know what else is high in sodium? Are pancakes and waffles. You probably didn't even think of that. So if you eat a lot of those things like that, just see where you can watch your portion sizes and cut the sodium out elsewhere in your diet, so it'll balance out. And if you rely on a lot of canned or frozen meals, you're probably getting too much sodium. Even some of the reduced sodium ones are still quite high. For making soups, as I mentioned before, try to choose the unsalted chicken broth and chicken stocks. There are some soups that are mixes out in the market that don't have a lot of added sodium. This Frontier soup thing is an example. You can season foods with like dried herbs and spices, onion, garlic, things like that, instead of using the salt. And then another heart healthy eating tip is to try to have whole grains in your diet. So whole grains are things like whole wheat bread, quinoa, brown rice, stone ground corn, oatmeal. Okay. So try to have at least 3 or more whole grains a day. And that will help you get fiber, because usually the whole grains are a pretty good source of fiber as well. And then a quick review is think of ways to reduce sodium. So instead of using a packaged rice mix, for example, just choose like maybe some brown rice. So I forget what brand it was, but you can buy brown rice that all you have to do is boil it in the bag, and it doesn't have any salt added to it. So if you need a little bit of convenience, that can be put in the microwave as well. It tells you right on the package how to do that. So that's a really easy way. And I've seen quinoa in packages where you just have to reheat it. It's already pre-cooked. So that's a way to get some whole grains without having to wait 50 minutes for the brown rice to cook. Okay. You know, the other day, it's really funny. The other day I did the McCann's oats, the steel cut oats, and you have to stand over the stove and stir it every once in a while. But man, that's worth it, because the texture and the flavor is so good. If you don't have time, Bob's Red Mill makes rolled oats that are a little bit thicker, and those make a nice hearty breakfast, by the way. And then just simple Big Y rolled oats. Those are really easy to prepare, and that's a good way to start your day with some whole grains. My suggestion is you don't have to add that pinch of salt that some of the boxes say to add. You don't have to. And you can add fruit to that. So all kinds of fruit can go into oatmeal. So, and if you want to top your oatmeal off with a little bit of milk or yogurt, that'll boost up the protein. But anyway, isn't this a pretty picture here? We got some shrimp, some rice, some veggies. Looks yummy. All right. So, is there anything that stood out today that you think you can do? Maybe like one change you could make based on what you heard today. Janet, what did you come up with? You're gonna have to unmute.
Hi.
Hello.
I definitely, we don't buy a lot of packaged foods, but we have been using like Mrs. Dash instead of salt. So
Yeah.
that was a good choice, I think.
Yeah, that's a good one. I didn't include that in here. Because I have I cook a lot. So when I open my cupboard, there's all kinds of dried herbs in there. I have the summer blend that I got at Big Y. That's absolutely delicious. I like the Italian blend. Oregano, I have thyme. I have cardamom, cinnamon, and nutmeg, which can sweeten foods without the sugar. So I don't have any Mrs. Dash at the moment, but I have used that in the past. I just usually use what I look and see what's in my cupboard and say, what's going to go well in this dish? But Mrs. Dash is great because you can use it for almost every like side dish, main dish, that needs a little extra flavor. Perhaps not dessert so much, but the other types of foods.
Right.
So I just wanted to let you know that we have some seminars coming up that might be of interest to you on the Big Y website. You can sign up for them. One that I think might be interesting is I'm doing brain health on March 15th, and it's at 3 p.m. And then trying to see what else. I thought I had Mediterranean diet coming up again soon. I'm also doing one on just on whole grains coming up at the end of March. So if you go to that bigY.com/livingwell/get social, I think that's in the newsletter, isn't it, Debbie, from time to time?
Yes, I do include that towards the bottom of the e-news every week. There's a section for additional virtual learning opportunities, and I do look ahead for the week and what Big Y is offering.
Yeah.
You really do offer a great selection.
I know there's in March, one of the themes for Big Y is being more mindful. So I know Jackie Duran and myself, 2 different times, we're doing the mindful eating. So really paying attention, blah, blah, blah.
That's what I was going to answer when you were talking about what we could do. I think that's, for me anyway, just being mindful, because I feel like I know all this. It's all makes a whole lot of sense. It's just that, once you pay attention to it, you realize what you're doing.
Yeah.
How easy it is to, eat several servings of one thing, and anything processed,
Yeah.
not good. I did have one question, if I could interrupt. One thing I always debate on, I always thought that ground turkey, the 93% ground turkey was a better choice than the 93% ground beef. Now, my family doesn't always enjoy the ground turkey, and they, it's been a debate. Is it just as healthy to go with the ground beef?
Well, they have slightly different nutrient profiles. The ground beef is going to have more iron. So think of your family in general. I don't know, you have kids, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how old they are, but if you have a teenage boy, extra iron. Oh, and teenage girls both need extra iron. So, I don't know what stage of life they're in.
Yeah.
So
they're older. I just always try, red meat, I say once a week, not more than that. So I end up choosing the turkey instead, but does it make a difference?
So like I said, you have to look in the context of your total family and the needs. So I think with even young adults, especially young adult women, probably need a little extra iron. I think the RDA is 18 milligrams, and if they're not eating a lot of red meat, sometimes that's hard to get. So that would be one concern. The other thing that you can consider is if you're making something like chili, you can chop up some mushrooms and saute it, and that can replace part of the meat. The other option is beans, like dried beans can replace some of the meat, and beans have a little bit of iron, plus you're getting complex carbohydrate, fiber, some minerals, and a source of protein. So, but it sounds like if you're only having red meat once a week, you're probably having some meatless meals anyway with the beans. I don't know.
We're bored of chicken.
Yeah. Fish is always a good alternative if your family likes it. All kinds of fish. I think having a variety. So those fatty fishes that we mentioned, but also keep in mind things like haddock. The white fishes are really high in protein and very low in fat. So excellent source of protein, not a whole lot of calories if anybody's watching calories. And then shellfish is really good for your immune system and brain health because of the types of minerals that are found in shellfish. So you want to include that whenever possible. Like I'll just give you an example. I don't know if your family likes shellfish, but I got those dry scallops. They were on sale a few weeks back, and I stir fried them with a couple bags of the bird's eye. It had pea pods, broccoli, carrots, water chestnuts.
That sounds good.
Yeah, and I just use low sodium soy sauce, some fresh grated ginger. I put in some of the summer seasoning and some thyme. I don't use, half the time I don't use a recipe. I make stuff up because,
I have a question about shrimp.
Yeah,
frozen shrimp.
Yep.
How good is that for a hot, healthy diet? I heard that shrimp has a lot of unfavorable characteristics for hot.
no. So that's the thinking that we had for a while, but most of the recent research shows that that shellfish doesn't tend to raise blood cholesterol levels. And part of the reason for that is it's extremely high in protein without the fat. So it has very little saturated fat in it. So it's less
Okay.
likely to raise blood cholesterol levels. So
And also-
certainly having shrimp, you saw I had shrimp on one of the pictures.
Yes, yes. Another question I have is about the different types of salt, such as Himalayan salt versus kosher salt and sea salt. Now, are they all basically the same thing?
They all basically have a lot of sodium, okay? It might vary slightly based on how coarse the salt is. So the finer the salt, the more you can fit in a teaspoon. So if you're comparing teaspoons, the regular table salt might have slightly more sodium than like a kosher salt, which might be bigger pieces.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, all those salts are pretty much just sodium chloride. And in the sea salt, you might be getting a minute amount of minerals added, but if you're on a low sodium diet, you need to watch your intake of all of those.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
No.
Thank you, Kathy.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks, Debbie.
Kathy. Thank
Enjoy
you
your
so
day.
much.
Everybody
Thank
stay healthy.
You
too.
too.
You
See you
too.
next
Bye-bye.
time.
Bye-bye.
All right.